Right, well, here we are. I figured that having fresh air was more important than having a white background. So we're here. Nice Sunday evening for me. 9 o'clock. Plenty of time for some evening coffee, intellectual ruminations, and the rest of it. So this is the part, for those of you who are wondering, where I pretend to be an intellectual and talk about all sorts of things that sound like what smart people might talk about. Of course, there's no room for fart jokes. There's no room for any kind of jokes. And if ever you disagree with something that I say, you can always attribute it to the fact that I don't know how to read, because I only made it through the second day of preschool before quitting. So, with all that in mind, there are a couple things to say, but I'm going to first check and see if anyone is here. And if anyone is here, who that person might be. One person is watching. Hello to whoever the guest might happen to be. I'm definitely not trying to steal any watchers, because I noticed just now that I got a bell notification that Caleb Beers has been streaming about the critique of pure reason for 42 minutes, which is excellent. So, if you went from watching him to watching me, I'm going to suggest that you go back to watching him until such a point as he finishes, in which case you can go jump onto this particular stream and then get acquainted with the beginning part later, just by watching on a video after it buffers. Because the critique of pure reason is actually very important work to go through. Kant is, at least according to my opinion, one of the very best philosophers in all history. I'd put him up there with Aristotle. I'd put him up there with. Kant is. I think that Kant is. I don't know if there's anyone better than Kant. I really don't know. At least a lot of my own behavior is based upon Kantian principles. So I at least find the dude pretty compelling. I don't find him infallible. He's definitely not right about everything, but he's a very compelling philosopher. He's a cool dude. I'll have to actually go and watch Caleb's videos myself. Either that or just go and reread a critique, because I haven't read it since 2007 or 8. It's been over a decade since I've read the thing. But I do remember that when I read it, he didn't say anything that didn't make. He said very few things that didn't make perfect sense. What in the world? Oh boy, I got a message from Mr. Ale Ballester. I'm going to have to go and take a little look and see what he sent, so that we can perhaps find something to discuss and make fun of here on stream. And then when Mr. Ballester comes, I'll be able to suggest for him to take a look at whatever the content happens to be. Okay, so there's that. Let's see what he sent. Alright, we're going to go here to Quora. And alright, so you got 36 upvotes on this answer, so it's very good. Okay. Alright, all. I like to ask smart folk, what is your best idea? But I found out that most are afraid to share for fear of being exploited or say something like, what do you mean? The dimension of unconscious thinking, dreaming, what do triple nines dream about is more interesting. And how about the void? When you go deep, can you see the connection? Huh? Okay. I'm just going to pretend like I didn't see any of that eye cancer. That didn't make any sense to me, but whatever. I suppose we're supposed to fear the void or something like that. I suppose we're supposed to fear the void. So now I'm just here talking to myself because I've gone and sent everyone else to Caleb Beer's stream, which is actually quite refreshing because then I can actually have... I mean, like, the ruminations don't mean that anybody else has to be here. But I'm very glad that everyone went to go see the critique. What do I have here? Oh yeah, I can go and talk about people making poor financial decisions. People making poor financial decisions that involve me. I don't like that. Namely, if we'll just go with a semi-hypothetical situation, or if I'm working with... No, I actually can't do that without breaking somebody's confidence. We'll just suffice it to say that sticking to a budget is a very important thing to do. Preferably, go under budget. Now, there are many different ways of thinking about a budget. There are many different ways of understanding the topic. There are many different ways of looking at money. Now, there's one school of thought that says minimize expenses. And then there's the other school of thought that says maximize the value that you produce. So basically, there are some people that says you're never going to get rich. Penny pinching. You're never going to get rich by cutting out little things over time that you go and sink your money into. You're much better off focusing on producing more. And I get that the general balance of production to consumption, you should be always producing more than what you consume, assuming that you don't want to be broke. Like, being broke means consuming as much or more as you produce. That's living hand to mouth. If you want to be able to accomplish something, you'll always go and try to optimize your life in such a way that you're producing or have systems in place that are producing more than you yourself and anyone associated with you or under your care consumes. That is basic personal finance 101, personal finance 1, personal finance 0. I don't know. That's the first rule is that money in greater than money out, or value in greater than value out. Value that I'm gaining, or rather the value that I'm producing, and then therefore either I'm gaining in terms of what people owe me in terms of selling my services, or in terms of what I'm being able to keep as opposed to consuming, is greater than what I consume. Value produced greater than value consumed. Now, some people say it's okay to keep on increasing your consumption as long as your production increases commensurate to that. And I can completely understand that. assuming that you're consuming efficiently. Right? If you're not consuming efficiently, I would say that there's room for improvement. You're talking to an INTJ. You're talking to somebody who looks at things in terms of systems and tries to optimize them. And I think that this whole idea of optimization comes often, or at least it feels like it's at the expense of getting things done. Like, you can have people that analyze a system until they turn blue in the face and then never actually go out and implement anything. You can wind up having somebody who, let's say who's thinking about starting a business, but never starts the business because the plan isn't perfect. Or a person that has an idea, wants to build something, wants to make something, wants to accomplish something, but never sets out because the plan is never quite perfect enough. Now, that's one case where, you just need to kick somebody into it and say, go, do it. Just go, have at it. You'll be fine. That's one instance where overthinking and trying to optimize everything is a bad idea. But once you're already in business, or once you're already working on a project, once you've already taken that leap of faith, use your ingenuity both to figure out how you can produce more and how you can consume less. Like, one of the biggest things that people run into is in their personal life is what happens when you get a raise. What happens when you get a promotion? What happens when you get an increase in what comes in? And what are most people going to do? Most people are going to take that raise, they're going to take the promotion, they're going to take the extra money that they get, their extra windfall, their extra bonus, and they're going to say, well, I could at one point live in this kind of an apartment or a house, so I can afford an extra, say, $500 a month, so I'll live in a $300 a month more expensive apartment, and I will buy, I'll sell the car that I currently have and take a loan to buy a car that cost me $200 a month more than the previous car cost. Now, that shows a lack of ability to or desire to delay gratification. That can either be from a sense of futility, that can be from a sense of saying, well, I'm never going to retire wealthy, so why even bother trying? Or it could just be because the person doesn't have the foresight to realize that the saying, money burning a hole in your pocket, exists for a reason, and no, money burning a hole in your pocket isn't a good thing unless you're going and purchasing assets with it. So, if you wind up getting that extra money coming in, the natural inclination for many people, especially the people that are very sensory oriented, is going to be to spend it. It's going to be to spend, to spend, to spend, to spend, to spend. Whereas the actual appropriate course of action is to save, to save, to save, to save, to save, and then to invest, 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 invest. And why do you do savings first and investing next? Well, saving provides you a cushion. Saving, if you save half a year's worth of living expenses, for instance, will provide you what it takes to get out of an oh crap. The crap just started pouring in. What do I do? You have your car dies, and you need to figure out what to do. Get a cheapo clunker until you can get back on your feet. You lose your job, and you need to have something available to pay for your needs while you go and find another one. You are in business and people stop buying your stuff, and you need to go and rethink what it is that you're selling and provide something else to the market that is of better value, or rethink your marketing strategy or what have you. Having that cushion is immensely important. So once you have that cushion, once you have a little extra room to breathe, a little extra wiggle room, then you can do things that involve investing. Then you can do things that involve investing. And yes, inflation will gradually decrease the value of the money that you have there in your OCRAP fund. I'll admit that. But the OCRAP fund is still important to have. And once you get past that point of needing the utility of it because your investments are just producing so much that you don't have to worry about it so much. But OCRAP fund is very important to have. So after this OCRAP fund, then the next thing to do is to make sure that you are not in consumer debt. If you're and the reason that this debt is bad is ultimately if you get into a bad situation and you're still servicing debt, you're still making debt payments, you're going to get sunk. So if you go and you invest and you still have high interest debt, so credit card debt for instance, some sort of consumer debt, then you still wind up having money going out on a regular basis, but you're not necessarily having something to replenish it, and that's an easy way of going broke and ruining your life. So getting rid of especially credit card debt is of immense importance after you have your OCRAP fund of say, one to 2 months worth of expenses. Then you start paying down your debt, increasing your OCRAP fund about half a year's worth of expenses, and you wind up having all your debt paid down. You focus on getting that gone, and of course that involves a certain amount of discipline, and you just go and do what you have to do. There's a nice book entitled The Richest Man in Babylon. You can follow that, and that gives you a pretty good blueprint as to what to do. I think that there's this one dude, ENTJ dude, Dave Ramsey, I think is his name. He has a financial literacy thing that he does, and it's not too bad. Either way, you basically pick whatever it is you're going to do, and learn about paying yourself first and then do it. And then, once you get to the point of having a little bit better scenario, then that's the point where it comes time to come up with a plan for increasing your wealth. And I know there are many people that feel safer living hand to mouth. There's less responsibility, in other words, less thinking. But the fact of the matter is, increasing your wealth or increasing your assets that are under your control is not a bad thing. Increasing assets under your control is a very good thing, because ultimately then you wind up being, instead of a slave to your wages, you will be able then to go and do many more things than you would otherwise be able to do. That means you would be able to, if you want to work at your job, you can work at your job, but then if a bad boss comes around, you can just go and quit and find another job. You can literally just go in any circumstance and say, yeah, I have everything pretty well figured out. And I can tell anybody to screw off and not have to deal with the implication. I will have much more of a say of what happens in my own life. Now, I am not yet financially independent in that sense, in that I need to actually still work and so on. But we're getting there, and we are budgeting accordingly. So that's one big thing. And then whatever investments you decide to do, whether you start a business and figure out how to systematize it and hire employees, and then you just keep basic tabs on it, or whether you get together with a group of your friends and decide, okay, we're going to go and buy some real estate and My contribution will be some money, this person's contribution will be some money and some labor, and that person's contribution will be labor, and then you go and you buy a fixer-upper and then flip it, or buy a fixer-upper and then rent it out or whatever. You can go and come up with all sorts of plans. You can decide, okay, well, these stocks have a good value, and I'm actually going to do a video one of these Sundays about how to value stocks. How to value stocks. It's actually a very important skill to be able to have, because it's exactly the same as looking at your own personal finances. It's looking at the reports the SEC gives or makes available is exactly the same as looking at your own personal finance. You just got to know what the names of the numbers are, and so you can go and basically think of this whole thing as, managing your money, managing other people's money, and trying to generate different streams of revenue by investing in things that provide value for other people. That is it. That is all there is to it. But still, somehow, people wind up screwing things up. People focus more, they believe that working hard is enough. Or they believe that receiving government aid is enough. Or they believe that they have all of these unfounded opinions about what it means to actually generate value in the world. And ultimately, the way that you generate value is by giving people what they need and want. So, if and I'm not saying that everything's going to work out perfectly for everyone who tries to provide value, but what I am saying is that this idea of mindlessly plodding through life and being a spendthrift and letting money burn a hole in your pocket and also racking up consumer debt is a very poor idea. If your balance sheet in life is negative, there is some rethinking that needs to be done. Austerity measures can take place. And at the same time, when you are taking austerity measures, you can take measures to produce more. Because ultimately, the balance in your life is going to be a balance of what you produce versus what you consume. That's the end-all and the be-all of it. Certainly what other people do has an impact on you, because it depends, that determines the value of what it is that you produce with respect to what other people are producing. But the only person you ever have real control over is yourself, your actions, your plans. And so it's important to make these plans and stick to them, and modify them as necessary according to prevalent circumstances. But it's one of the simplest, I'm not going to say easiest, but one of the simplest things in the world that many people do screw up. And I can sit here talking until I turn blue in the face about it. The fact of the matter is, many of the people watching this video aren't going to listen. They're just going to go, and this is going to be, what do you call it? Motivational porn, I think is the term for that, where you basically constantly get this flow of motivational speech, motivational information, and plans, and you just go and you catalog it and you don't do anything about it. There's plenty of people that aren't going to do anything about it, but for every single person that does that, there are going to be people that actually want to improve their situation and will do so. In fact, I know that here it's quite likely that someone that I know that's going to be out of consumer debt very soon, and I are going to be able to engage in many investment plans that look forward to providing value for other people in the future, and And it's going to be a wonderful set of opportunities wherein everybody associated therewith has a great potential to become wealthy, right? I'm pursuing some of my own side hustles, many of them indeed. Some of them are taking traction faster than others. Others are getting completely, others I have to scrap, and others are somewhere in between. It's just a question of keeping track of all the irons in the fire and attempting to make things work. I'm by no means as much of an expert in this as people that have made billions of dollars doing it, but the fact of the matter is the principles remain the same. It's just that some people wind up executing a whole lot better than other people. And there's also this idea that some people have different motivations. Some people have more. If you look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, some people's motivations are entirely in the lower, more base categories of the pyramid, and that means that those people are going to be able to likely, unless they find a way of matching their higher level motivations with things that make money. The people with the lower level motivations are going to be the ones, if they have the intelligence and the drive and so on, that wind up making more money. Whereas the people with the higher level motivations that can't connect it somehow to real life are going to wind up being aspirational and not accomplishing anything. But the highest achievers are going to be the people that can wind up bringing both purpose and value to their lives and to the lives of others. Both to their lives and to the lives of others. Now I'm going to take a little bit of a break, meaning I'm not going to not sit up like this, and I'm going to see who all happens to be watching. Alright, so now I have to remember who Legolas is. You're Jack, am I correct? Hello Legolas, hello whoever else happens to be watching, welcome to the stream. I have no idea how long you've been here, and I'm very sorry if I've been ignoring you this whole time. I was just having one of these weird monologues. And the funny thing is, what I was giving you there wasn't necessarily an intellectual rumination. It wasn't necessarily an intellectual rumination. Hello, Dylan. Good to see you here. Welcome to the stream. If there are any other topics that you're interested in touching on, feel free to let me know. I'd be very interested in going. I need to figure out how to pop the stream chat out. Pretty sure there's an easy way of doing it. There we go. Ha! I can sit here and look at the chat. It's excellent. Excellent, excellent, excellent. I can just go put that over the edge. And now I can actually make sure that my face is centered in the picture at the same time that I read the chat. This is great. Alright. So, some more ruminations. I'm just going to let you know a little bit about the schedule. We started at 9 p.m. my time, and we're going to be going until somewhere in between 11 o'clock and midnight, depending on how long my voice holds out. I'm still recovering a little bit from a cold, so I might need to go and get a drink or something here in the intervening time. A drink of something that isn't coffee with milk. If I wind up getting too much phlegm. But other than that, we're going to be able to go and talk, and if my voice lasts even past 12, well, we'll go past 12, but I'm not entirely certain that'll take place. Anyhow, over the course of the past few weeks, a few things have taken place that have gotten in the way of my streaming, namely a bunch of work on the farm. Now I'm back home, and this past week we had a couple sessions talking about the Iliad Book 2. And a recurring theme here, when it comes to analyzing the Iliad, is what is it that Homer keeps on bringing out? What is it that keeps on being compelling? And what it is that winds up drawing people in, and what ultimately drives the stories, is effective interpersonal communication, or lack thereof. So we can learn what it is that causes people to tick, what it is that causes people to emotionally respond. We can learn that by looking at fiction, we can learn it by looking at poetry, we can learn it by looking at the classics. And the reason that the classics are classic is because things have I hate phrasing it this way because it's like more appeal to history. But the reason things keep their appeal over time, or the reasons that they've stood the test of time, is because there's some element of human nature that responds to them. Now, of course, this necessitates an understanding or a belief that there is a human nature to be able to go and make this kind of an argument. This argument is predicated upon the idea that there is a human nature, and I'm going to treat it as self-evident that there is. Aristotle goes and says basically the difference in between human beings and animals is reason. Now, there's a certain school of modern and postmodern thought that basically says human beings and animals are human beings are animals. And I'm going to go and say there is that difference, that categorical difference. I'm going to go and take the side of Aristotle on this particular matter. And if you disagree with that particular premise, well then, I don't even know if I'm necessarily going to argue it at this point, because that winds up being a very, very, very deep hole that you can't dig yourself out of in a couple hours. So, there are certain things that resonate with human beings. There are, of course, certain things that resonate with animals. But the way we present things, the way we utilize our reason, the way we control our bodies, the way we control our tongues, the way we control ourselves, ultimately has a great say in what kind of results we wind up getting. And as a wise man once said, to paraphrase, what has been before. What's going on now has gone on in some variant thereof has gone on in the past. So this basic idea of having variants of different things going on, of there basically being nothing new under the sun, ultimately says you can kind of look at the situation, look at history, and then learn what you want to copy and apply to your general situation in life. And so lack of historical knowledge, and lack of a knowledge of literature, and lack of a knowledge of all these different things that you wind up getting in a classical education can leave you having to figure things out and having to ultimately reinvent a wheel that has already been invented before. Not that there's anything wrong with reinventing the wheel, but oftentimes these sorts of things can fuel our creativity and can give us something more tangible upon which we can ruminate. Something more tangible upon which we can ruminate, as opposed to being stuck reconstructing things, or rather constructing things from basic principles, as opposed to simply reconstructing them and seeing how they are relevant. Because reconstructing from basic principles as opposed to constructing from basic principles are two different things. Both are conducive to learning, but one is much more efficient than the other. If you already have the template of people that have been living a good life, well, you can be, I want to be like that person. And so biographies can be fun. In fact, many of my friends growing up, friends, I use loosely, many of my friends were people in biographies. Benjamin Franklin, I got to know him as well as I possibly could over the many years by reading an autobiography that he wrote and by reading a bit about what it is that he did, some opinions that other people had of him, and so on. And ultimately, I think that he's a great guy, and a lot of what he does is definitely worth reading and worth mimicking and so on. Ben Franklin was really, really cool. And then also, if you go and you find difficult periods in history and you look at people that persevered throughout them, the character traits they exemplified, the patterns in their behavior, the patterns that got them through the difficult times, you can go and exemplify them. Yeah, there is a survivorship bias, but ultimately people that survived bad times did have things that were categorically better about them than people that didn't survive. Now, of course, there are some things that are completely indiscriminate, as opposed to calling, but there are certain traits that make people more likely to survive than not, and exemplifying them and mimicking them is a very important thing to do. And that's why we go and do things like read the Iliad, or that's why Caleb goes and does things like read Critique of Pure Reason. Now, why one might read Critique of Pure Reason is a little bit more abstract than why someone might read the Iliad, but nevertheless it is of great importance. The reason someone might read the Iliad is simply because one wants to go and pick a character and be like him. Especially one might read the Odyssey because one wants to figure out how to be like Ulysses or Odysseus, whatever you decide to call him. And how to get through different circumstances, because the Odyssey is the story. The Odyssey is the story arc, and it's very, very difficult to find anything new that hasn't already been discussed to some extent in the Odyssey. Now, when you start reading philosophy, when you start reading, okay, what are the limits of reason? If you start reading something like that, that serves to at bare minimum provoke thought. That serves at bare minimum to think, well, okay, we live in a world now where people are touting science this and science that. Now, being a scientist, I love science. I think the scientific method is a great way of getting at certain truths. But I also think that the scientific method, well, many things are imputed to the scientific method that can't be or shouldn't be imputed. The scientific method can't tell us what is moral or immoral or amoral. The scientific method can't derive an ought from an is. If we look at Kant's categorical imperative, which, if I briefly summarize it, it goes something like don't follow maxims that you can't also will as universal laws. I hope I didn't butcher that. So you wind up getting all these different things about Kant and his way of looking at the world, and all the different things that he calls into question a little bit, or at least all the different things that he causes some sort of provocation, and then you read it with the lens of what's going on in the world today, you gotta think. You really gotta think. Where do we get our morality? How do we make our decisions? What criteria do we use for determining what is good and what is bad? What is our value system? You can't just go and say science. Science is not a value system. Science is a system of inquiry. Science is a system of testing hypotheses. Science is a system of learning about something in a quantitative sense. And the more you study, the more we realize that a lot of our quantitative models are inaccurate. Now, a lot of our quantitative models are very accurate. Hello, Ale. It took you almost exactly 1 hour from the point of saying that it would take you an hour to do whatever it is that you had to do. So welcome. We're just in the process of talking about the limits of reason, the limits of science, and the derivation of moral systems. And then ultimately, oh, okay, I didn't know how long you've been here, but I'm sure. Oh yeah, there's a 15-second delay, so at least you knew something like that. Ah, there we are. We have to show that comment. I can't believe they're actually like censoring my buddy Ali's comments. Yeah, I actually read that comment on stream. How was it? That just blew my mind. You know, trying to blow my mind with something that's sophisticated and complicated, that is not going to work. The best way to blow my mind is with abject stupidity. Like just people pulling stuff out from where the sun don't shine and holding up a steaming turd as if it were a gold nugget. No. 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 None of that crap. That confuses me. So, anyhow, going back to much more interesting topics, such as... What? You bought a lottery ticket. Well, what was the expected outcome? What's your expected outcome? I mean, people at, was it MIT, bought lottery tickets and had a positive expected outcome. I mean, if you spend $1 and have an expected outcome of receiving $1 too, oh boy, Ali's asking me to take a guess here. I don't know. I'm guessing that you bought a stupid lottery ticket to buy. Or maybe you count it in terms of utils and you're doing it just for the shock value. Ah, negative infinity. So you bought a lottery ticket just so you could go around telling people that you bought a lottery ticket. And you have a story to tell. And then you can wind up having a whole bunch of... See, now what you got to do is you bought the lottery ticket. Now you have to go tell everybody a story about buying the lottery ticket. Then you tout the fact that you're an intelligent person and bought a lottery ticket, and then start your own lottery, and then get other people buying lottery tickets from you. That's what you got to do. You do use it as a marketing scheme. Exactly. You sell the story. Mm-hmm. You pay to get the story, and then you make a windfall. Or a waterfall, because people just keep on buying more and more lottery tickets. More money, more money. What really bothers me, right, is that you can go places around here and buy lottery tickets. But it's regulated. Only certain people can sell lottery tickets. Only certain people can sell lottery tickets. There is no free market for lottery tickets, so I can't go and legally start up a lottery here in Finland. I would need to go and get all the permits. I would need to go do all this other stuff and jump through all the hoops, all the things that would be barriers to my entry in the lottery ticket selling field, which is stupid. I mean, like, there's as if there's like some responsible way and irresponsible way that the government can go and regulate that we take advantage of stupid people. Like almost they regulate casinos that you have to have at least a certain likelihood of pulling the lever and getting a coin. No, you don't. I mean, people are going to lose anyway. Everyone knows the house always wins. People are so stinking stupid. You know, people go and say the lottery is a tax on stupidity, and that's exactly what it is. You don't buy lottery tickets unless you have ulterior motives. Maybe I should go buy a lottery ticket. That'll be fun. Then I can go and have that like I can put it in a scrapbook. Maybe I can even sell the lottery ticket for more than what I paid for it. And just as proof that, hey, Matt bought a lottery ticket. And when I get rich and famous or something, I can go and sell my lottery ticket and say, yeah, this is evidence that I bought one. So maybe I do have a positive financial expected outcome. I don't know. Either way, I'm out of coffee and I need to go and pour myself some more. You will sell a $20 bill for $100. I will too. I will too. I wonder if anyone would buy it. I will give you a $20 bill now for $100 in my PayPal tomorrow. Or something. Did everyone leave? Oh. Maybe everyone left, I don't know. Well, there are 3 people watching. But the fact of the matter is they know that we're being idiots, so you know, they're just gonna go and let us be idiots. And then of course we got all the people that go and watch the stream afterward that can go and watch all this all of this idiocy unfolding. I mean, it's great. Someone say something with some subtle logical inconsistency. Sorry, it's difficult for me to come up with something like that. Hey, Ale, why don't you go and argue with yourself? You can say something with some subtle logical inconsistency. Our deepest thoughts, huh? We had a conversation about that at some point. It was interesting, though. It's interesting. Mr. Ballester and Mr. Beers have both been behaving much more like ENTJs recently. This is a bit scary and kind of earth-shattering to someone in my lowly INTJ position. Intellectual ruminations. Oh, you're adopting personalities. So are you attempting to engender within yourself multiple personality disorder? Or are you just, like, acting, or what's going on? Oh, you got a full stack of them now? Lovely. I used to play around with that crap. It is kind of fun, though. I'll admit that. But, and I guess I still do show different facets of myself to different people. Who cares about what? Ah, I see. Okay. So, yeah. Well, all us being schizophrenic or having multiple personality disorder or something, we can go and discuss, I don't know, we've already discussed a bit about personal finance, a bit about investing, a bit about value, a bit about why in the world it's important to learn the classics. Oh, is there some sort of a time problem with the chat? See if I can go and, May you join the stream or something? Yeah, sure. Go ahead, I would just need to go and find a way of patching your audio and our video through. Now might be a little bit difficult, just because I've been messing with Wirecast for too long. But, yeah, in the near future, definitely. Though I will say that if you intend to join, it'd be very nice to hear you instead of a CPU fan. So it's much more nice to talk with a person than a CPU fan. Yeah, the last time I tried getting somebody connected in the middle of a stream, As opposed to already having everything worked out beforehand, I wound up crashing my computer. It's just a question of not enough processing power, and then too many things open, and then it requiring too much processing power to set things up and stream at the same time, and so on. It's just, ugh. So we've been going for almost an hour, and the next thing that we're going to discuss is there was a very nice piece that I was reading earlier today. It was a piece by Susanna Viljanen, who works at Aalto University, and it was a piece about why are intellectuals, academics, and creatives more drawn to socialism. And it brings an interesting point. So I'm going to read what she says. Susanna says, no, let me just make sure that I have my picture so that there's some semblance of good. My face is in the right spot. Susanna says, face it, or the whole thing condenses to a truism. The communists lied about socialism but told the truth about capitalism. Face it, capitalism is an ugly system. It is by no means just, and it favors gamesmen, sleazeball psychopaths, those with all appearance and no substance, those who have relations, those who have relatives, those who are good backstabbers, and those who are most ready to exploit their fellow human beings without remorse. The more intelligent someone is, the more empathetic, socially skilled, and altruistic he or she also tends to be, and the less greedy, materialistic, and ambitious. He or she more likes to mind his or her own matters, is less likely to compare himself or herself to others, to follow trends, fashions, or fads, and would rather be creative than to live by rules made by someone else. As we live in capitalism, everyone can see the everyday and the ugly sides of capitalism. Unemployment, poverty, divided society, societal classes, consumerism, Philistinism. Capitalism, by its nature, is Philistine and anti-intellectual and based on the lowliest instincts of human: greed, lechery, and avarice. In theory, socialism is a great system. It promises rational and sensible societal structure, meritocracy, equality, democracy, freedom, and everyone an opportunity to practice what they're good for without having to produce what the markets desire. Unfortunately, its primary premise is that humans are angels and basically good. Okay, I still don't understand meritocracy and socialism, but we'll let that slide. The more intelligent someone is, the more willing he or she also is to be a humanist and to believe good of everyone and of humanity. As everyone sees the reality of capitalism every day and tends to desire that things were otherwise, socialism is seen as a viable alternative for capitalism. There are basically three kinds of socialists. 1. Wide-eyed idealists who dream of a better world and overall good of humankind, and who like the socialist philosophy. 2. Ruthless cynics who solely desire power and status. 3. Amoral opportunists who are ready to sell their mothers for getting the most of the situation. Socialism and leftism is basically the continuation of the philosophy tradition of the Enlightenment and the French Revolution. It believes in centrism, statism, radicalism, secularism, and deconstruction, insisting that all the existing structures are bad, useless, rotten, or outright evil and must be deconstructed and torn down so that a new system can be built upon them. Conversely, conservatism is based on evolution. on the assumption that the existing structures are products of cultural evolution, that they may not be the best available, but the least worst, and everything affects on everything else, and that revolution is much more likely to lead into disaster than to produce anything good. To make revolution, all three groups are needed. The socialists in academia are mainly either wide-eyed idealists or amoral opportunists. The second group, ruthless cynics, come from the ranks of professional politicians. Unfortunately, humans are not angels, but bastards. Humans are not basically good. Humans are basically evil. Capitalism is not the best system available, but it is the least bad. The conservatives are right. Evolution produces much better results than revolution, and capitalism is the product of cultural evolution. Socialism would work if humans were inherently good. Unfortunately, humans are inherently evil. The inevitable result of socialism put into practice is a ruthless totalitarian control state with everyone living in equal poverty and fear. This is something the intellectuals, creatives, and academics never realize. They don't realize that once the socialists get the power, group number 2 seizes the power, and the best case scenario is that group number 1 is subjugated into the same state they initially had. The worst case situation is they get shot or sent to Siberia. Group 3 will now occupy all the important places in the society. They are the original we're using apparatchiks. Confessing to be a pro-capitalist or to be a right-winger is the same as confessing to be an asshole. People who really like capitalism are generally considered to be narcissists, psychopaths, or sleazeballs. Unfortunately, the situation is not that simple. It never is either or I tend to say capitalism is not a nice system, but it is the least bad, and things could always be worse. Well, there's definitely a lot to be said here. There's a great deal. There's a great deal to be said about that. I think this was on those. First off, I think this was on is conflating a capitalism with cronyism. Cronyism is especially, socialism. Crony capitalism is, by definition, socialism. Pure free market capitalism does not result in the evils that she describes, necessarily. Those evils only happen when you wind up injecting government into the equation. Now, I have a theory, and this is probably going to be a very unpopular theory, but the people that do not like capitalism are the people that do not believe that the rising tide lifts all the ships. There are people that do not believe that what is good for the rich is also good for the poor. Why? The reason is because people see in capitalism there is always going to be a Pareto distribution of wealth. There is always going to be people that wind up amassing more wealth unto themselves because they produce just so much more than other people do. What winds up happening is these people go and they look at the people way up there in the stratosphere of wealth, compare them to themselves, and think, well, look, the fact that there is somebody so great shines a light on my own inadequacy. The fact that there is such a big difference, clearly there's something gone wrong here. No, rather than looking at the absolute difference in before and after capitalism, rather than looking at the absolute difference before, increasing the biggest increase in production in all of history that's taken place in the past a couple hundred years or so now. Just comparing before and after. Um, comparing before and after isn't good enough, because people's monkey brains still want to climb the status hierarchy. And if people resort to monkey brain behavior, if people resort to status monkey behavior, then they ultimately won't believe that a rising tide affects all ships. Or rather, they just won't think that their share was enough. They won't think that they got a big enough share for whatever it was that they were going for. Even though the share of the poorest of the poor in the West, and even the poorest of the poor in other places in the world, is better than that of kings centuries ago. That's not good enough for many people. And going and saying, well, just be patient, wait for things to get even better, and oh, by the way, try to produce more. Focus on producing more. Lots of people don't have the patience to do that. Lots of people don't have the fortitude to do that. Lots of people just want to have what they want to have now. And because capitalism necessitates industriousness, it necessitates going out there and making what you want and getting what you want and so on, it screws things up. It's a lot easier to convince somebody that the person up there in the stratosphere, a person with a lot more wealth, got it at your expense. The reason you're not wealthy is because we're all the same, and that person just wound up taking what belongs to you, and so you deserve it back. Or that person's grandpa took what belonged to your person's grandpa, and now you deserve it. It comes from the belief that we are all the same. All have exactly the same potential. And so on. And people buy that because people that are on the bottom don't want to be on the bottom. But the only way that they can see themselves improving their situation is stealing from the haves and giving to the have-nots. Now, on the big scale of things, I am not a have. I'm a lot closer to a have-not than a have, due to my graduate school debt. But that doesn't mean that all of a sudden I'm going to say, well, okay, just let the government go, pay my graduate school debt, give me free everything. I'm not going to I'm not going to work. If I weren't constantly trying to provide value for people, I don't know what I would do with myself. I really don't. And to think that the welfare state has gone and made so many people so dependent upon the structures that redistribute wealth that they don't even know what they would do with themselves if the structures were removed. That people just constantly want more and more and more and more without doing anything. That is ultimately a function of one particular vice. That vice is envy. That vice is envy. And however nicely we may spin socialism, ultimately, socialism is predicated upon one thing and one thing only. This envy of the have-nots. And because, according to a Pareto distribution, there will always be more have-nots than there will be haves, in a relative sense. There will always be a population that is ready to accept socialism. Always. Now, how ready is contingent upon the Gini coefficient, the degree to which the Pareto distribution is spread, and so on. But ultimately, that drive is always going to be there. Now, that vice called envy at one point used to be contemptible, and I think it still should be contemptible, because the fact of the matter is it allows have-nots. If you don't have envy, the have-nots can go and focus on bettering their own circumstance and being thankful for what they do have, as opposed to having a mindset that prevents them from growing and prevents them from doing what they need to do in order to provide more value for other people. So in other words, envy is the act of shooting yourself in the foot by looking at what other people have as opposed to looking at what you can do. Sure, what other people have, you can use what other people have. You can go and make proposals and submit them to people that have more than you to invest their money, and then you make some off of whatever investment they might happen to have. Like, they're not going to... You come up with a good deal, you're not going to get screwed. The deal will specify this person gets this much, that person gets that much, and so on, and you just hold people accountable to the deal. Period. But there's this element of interpersonal interaction that's lost. There's this element of good deal making that's lost. There's this element, all these different elements that go into good operation within free markets that are just completely lost. And ultimately they're predicated upon keeping an open mind, having a growth mindset. I mean, the growth mindset has always been around, but it's been now popularized in the book, was it Mindset or whatever it is. But people have known that for ages. People have called it having a can-do attitude. And there's the saying, "Can't died in the poorhouse." The person that goes around saying, I can't, died in the poorhouse. That's a very old saying. And it's very true, although, the poorhouse back in the day was actually a really, really bad place. Whereas, now you wind up having, poor people watching flat screen TVs and eating pizzas and living in government housing and having a better standard of living than most people have for the history of the entire world. But these ideas of mindset and character have always been there. But due to and here I'm going to make another assertion, due to the decline in morals, which is ultimately due to the decline in the nature of the way that morals are transmitted from parents to children, the government has gotten bigger because people fail to be able to govern themselves. So when you take away people's ability to govern themselves, i.e. you take away their moral compass, then you wind up inserting the government that can go and wind up doing all sorts of different things. They'll wind up making the situation worse for everybody just on the count of it being expedient for people that want power. People in group number 2 in a capitalist structure, as well as people in group number 3 in Susanna's model in a capitalist structure, go and turn it into socialism. They go and turn it into cronyism. They go and turn it into different things, and then they wind up saying, well, we can just go and buy people off by sending, throw these people a bone. Give them a little bit of money, just enough to subsist. And in a a democratic republic or a democracy, just give them enough to keep on sending the votes our way. It was a gigantic game, and if people were wise enough to see how the game is played, they wouldn't fall for it. Well, lots of people aren't. Lots of people aren't wise, and unfortunately, they're going to need to learn that fire burns by being burned. Unfortunately, that is how some people will learn. That's the only way some people will learn. And that is the ultimate reason why separating cause from effect is so deleterious and dangerous. If we separate cause from effect, we are taking away the biggest opportunities people have to learn. And the longer cause and effect are separated one from another, the more painful the lesson. The longer cause and effect are separated from one another, the more painful the lesson. We've been going at this for about an hour and 16 minutes. I propose we take an 8-minute break and return to discuss matters after I've had a chance to get another drink and give my voice a break. So I'll go set all these layers up, get it all ready to go, and look forward to seeing you then on the other side. Right, well, we're back. Hopefully that little bit of water helped. And hopefully I'll be able to get this open again. So the idea of using a tarp as a white background for a stream is a bad idea, by the way. Just don't do it. No, get a green screen or do something like that. I'm probably going to wind up investing in a green screen and putting a background that looks a lot like some of my favorite places and just putting it up there. I don't know. But either way, a green screen's going to be fun. So Todd brought up an interesting point. His point was that he knew a girl from the French aristocracy who made the same points against the French Revolution. That envy of the peasants led to the biggest mistake in French history. And yeah, I would say that that's one of the biggest things. Ultimately, having this whole thing framed as a class struggle, having this whole thing understood as rich versus poor, I don't know if that benefits anyone. Because ultimately, you wind up having people that go and you wind up having poop heads on both sides. But by and large, I sympathize with the grievances of poor people, but do not believe that redistributionist policies are a problem. I think that if poor people want to go and improve their situation, we can help them with things like learned helplessness. But ultimately, they're going to wind up having to use the faculties that they have to the best of their ability and make the best use of the faculties they have and rise to whatever level they can. Having a self-defeatist attitude doesn't help. Now, of course, there is the element of learned helplessness, as we learn from psychology. And that element of learned helplessness, it is what it is. But there are ways of getting over that. There are people that coach, there are people that help. It's certainly easier to go throw a pity party for yourself than it is to be able to actually go and improve yourself. But self-improvement can be done. Especially if you wind up having a coach or a cheerleader or a motivator. That's actually a very, very important point. And the fewer people we have in our lives that can actually help us in that regard, the worse of a position we happen to be in. But the problem of poverty is never one of money. That's one that poor people don't seem to understand. The redistribution of wealth is never going to help matters. All it's going to do is actually make matters worse for everyone. Now, if we go and we look then at the effect that it has on the rich, they're of course rich jerks. But the interesting thing is you can't, unless of course you're basically having a government forcing people to buy your product. In a free market, you can never become rich without providing somebody something they want. It doesn't work that way. In a free market, becoming rich is necessarily done by giving people what they want. So even if you are a jerk, and people don't really want to do business with a jerk anyway, but even if you are a jerk, you're going to wind up needing to give people what they want, or they won't do business with you. The biggest thing that I think that winds up being the problem is that people go and look and say, well, I could have done that. And I'm guilty of that too. I see this fad of rocks in a box that people would sell pet rocks, apparently. There was this, I don't know who came up with the idea of selling pet rocks, but that was a multi-million-dollar idea. Who knew that by collecting a bunch of rocks and putting them in a box and mailing them and giving instruction manuals for how to take care of your rock, people would go and make millions of dollars. Why was there an industry for Beanie Babies? I don't know. People liked the Beanie Babies. Why was there an industry for all sorts of different things that don't actually? It was because people will buy it. And I wasn't in on any of those trends. I didn't know that one could collect Beanie Babies and sell them on eBay. At one point I thought, well, this is so stupid, people won't buy it. Well, people who were better judges of human nature than I was at that point did, and made a handsome amount of money by doing that, right? Same with people that bought Bitcoin when it was very cheap and sold when it was very expensive. I mean, that's a really good move for the people that came up with the idea of using Bitcoin. And even though it's incredibly inefficient when it comes to energy usage, they happen to be in the right place at the right time. So, am I jealous? Yeah, kind of. Do I begrudge people the money that they make doing that? I can't anymore. I mean, I'm still dealing with my envy in many aspects, but envying people for giving people what they want and actually producing something that provides some value for somebody else, I can't do that. Even people involved in vicious activities, things that I would consider vicious, but that occurred due to voluntary trade on the parts of everybody. Well, I can't really say that I have a problem with that either. At least not from the sense of that I believe it should be disallowed or somehow forbidden. I of course have my own moral problems with such things as prostitution and whatever, but if there are people that want to go and engage in prostitution, and everyone is able to consent in that kind of a behavior, I'm not going to stop them. I might try to convince them not to, but I'm not going to stop them. And, I know people that have paid for their graduate school by engaging in prostitution. I know people that have paid for their graduate school by doing all sorts of Todd, excellent point. Very excellent point. Envy is fatalistic. Jealousy is hopeful and ambitious. And there's even another level to this, and it has to do with the ninth and 10th commandment, at least according to me as a Lutheran, which is thou shalt not covet. And then the ninth and the 10th commandment just specify what it is that you shall not covet. And covetousness is not only the desire, but it's ultimately the biggest understanding is wasting time. If you want something enough to scheme how you would get something by illegitimate means. So I believe thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house is the commandment number 9. And that would mean thy neighbor's property. So if you have this idea that I should not scheme to get my neighbor's property, why? Well, it belongs to my neighbor, first off. And the scheming is wasting my time. The scheming is actually going and turning me into an unproductive bum. Because I'm there focused on how am I going to get my neighbor's stuff rather than going out and getting my own stuff. Making stuff for myself, trading stuff, and so on. If it belongs to my neighbor and he parts in a mutually beneficial, consensual trade, then that's great. Hello, Daniel. I see you put your real name up there. Or maybe it's a fake name, I don't know. Or Or was I? So that's commandment number 9 is don't covet your neighbor's property, and then the other is don't covet your neighbor's basically surroundings, your neighbor's wife, manservant, maidservant, ox, donkey, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. And the idea is you don't envy your neighbor's situation in life such that you decide, okay, I'm going to go and hit on his wife and try to, or even think about hitting on his wife, and just fantasize, how would I get his wife? How would I get the people that are working for him? In this day and age, I suppose it would be like maid or gardener, or people that are doing some sort of a thing in his employ in that regard. How would I get his assets, his ox or donkey, things that ultimately wind up producing stuff for him? Just scheming to get them. Scheming to lure people away from doing things that they've promised to do, or being in roles that they've promised to be, and so on. That scheming is a huge waste of my time. Like, why in the world would there be a commandment against it? Well, it's because if I'm constantly focused on what it is that I'm going to get from somebody else, and how I can get it through illegitimate means, I'm not going to be focused on doing my own thing via legitimate means. YouTube wouldn't log your watch history on your other account. That's odd. That's really odd. I did send you another message. I don't know if you received it. But it actually had to do with well, I'll give, and this might seem like it's out of left field, but there's some great significance to this. There's one very important point that one can make about the kidney. There's one point of renal physiology that's very important. And I think it will benefit anybody who's in a position of having heart trouble, or having blood pressure trouble, having trouble also with blood sugar, and all sorts of things. And this is a case of, if the shoe fits, then wear it. If the shoe doesn't fit, then don't wear it. There's one small piece, which is actually a very big piece, and it has to do with insulin. Insulin, and then mineralocorticoids, or glucocorticoids as well. Adrenaline and things of that nature raise your blood pressure. Having too much insulin in your system will raise the concentration of hormones that raise your blood pressure. So, part of what you can do in order to lower your blood pressure Okay, so if for instance somebody has a predisposition to heart problems or a predisposition to high blood pressure, the first thing I would suggest, that if there are no counterindications, fasting on a regular basis, or intermittent fasting, or both, could potentially help. Fasting increases insulin sensitivity, so decreases the total amount of insulin that you will need, and it decreases the total amount of insulin in your body for the term of the fast. Then if you combine it with having a predominantly plant-based fibrous diet without processed crap, without sugars and without starches, and you drink plenty of water, and don't worry too much about your salt consumption, because you're going to wind up decreasing your amount of glucocorticoids and mineralocorticoids. If you intermittently fast, regularly fast, stay away from starches, stay away from sugars, drink plenty of water, and actually do get enough salt in your diet without having to worry about, all this extra insulin, and you get enough exercise in order to decrease your cortisol levels, you're on a good path to being healthy. Now, I can't promise that will help with any given problem, but it is a very good and important place to start. I'm saying this for the benefit of anybody that has a history of heart disease, anybody that has a history of high blood pressure, anybody that has a history of diabetes, anybody that is even having trouble with chronic stress. All these sorts of things can be ameliorated to some extent by changing the timing and the quantity and the nature of what one consumes. Now, I have been remiss. I haven't conducted a long fast for a very long time, and obviously that's kind of having a bad effect on me. I haven't been able to lose as much weight as I would have liked, and so on, as well as I've been eating some things I shouldn't have been eating while I've been going and visiting other people. Now, I'm actually going to be embarking on a fast of my own here, beginning at midnight, and the only thing I'm going to be consuming during my fast is water, coffee, and milk. And I'm going to fast for a week, and that's going to be that. That will be it. But I invite any of you that would like to join me in so doing. Just going to fast Monday through Sunday, and that's it. I was already discussing this with my wife, and the first 2 days are going to be difficult, but it will definitely have the desired impact on my life, and if any of you are interested, you can join along and hopefully experience something necessary and good in your life. Now, I don't recommend doing this if you're taking exogenous insulin, or if you do, then figure out what to do with your exogenous insulin in order to not run into any problems. And as a disclaimer, just you are responsible for your own actions. Don't do anything stupid. Be responsible, be educated, and do this on the right terms. But generally, you shouldn't wind up having any trouble if you're a healthy person or a generally healthy person and you're not on exogenous insulin, pregnant or nursing. Well, you don't need to drink coffee if you don't want to, unless you already do drink coffee. Oh, but cutting out ice cream, that's excellent. Cutting out potatoes and starches, those sorts of things are great. But yeah, if your parents won't let you fast, that's a big, you don't go and disrespect your parents in that sense. And even given the fact that you're growing, there are multiple indications there. If you were to, for instance, skip breakfast, that would be one thing that could really help. That would be an intermittent fast. You would just be increasing the window of not eating, and then you can just increase the size of your lunch and dinner proportionately. That's one thing you can do. Cutting out those simple carbs is very important, so it's a very good idea. Very good idea. Well, we've been going for an hour and 45 minutes already. This is pretty excellent. I wonder if I've run out of evening coffee. No, I haven't. And I've also noticed that this really helps with attention. This can help with willpower and attention as well. If you do fast, you can get an awful lot more acute thinking. Yes, coffee this late. Yes, and I'll be having some first thing in the morning too. I have probably too much coffee. I have pretty close to a liter every day. It's a little under a liter, about 800 or 900 mils. So, my own body has gotten used to it, and I would actually probably need to wean myself off of it over the course of 4 days if I wanted to. Oh, eating can easily make someone sluggish. It's interesting because when you eat, you wind up having first off a bunch of energy diverted into digesting the food that you eat. And if it is of the type that causes an insulin response, what winds up happening is your body goes into storage mode. Your body actually behaves as if it's starving. Your body behaves, if you have a lot of insulin, as if all it can do is suck in the food and not actually utilize it. And so, with high levels of insulin also come high levels of lethargy. Now, you can increase your insulin sensitivity by exercising, but one of the biggest things that actually increases the insulin sensitivity is by decreasing the need for it. If you take in fats, for example, they are metabolized differently and dealt with by the body differently. So I'm not saying go and have nothing but bacon or whatever, but healthy fats are really helpful. Well, I'm glad that you know your limits then with regard to coffee. I think that as long as I drink this one here, I'm going to be fine. If I were to drink any more, I would start running into trouble. But I think that has more to do with the baseline that my body's used to having. Now I have it more because I enjoy it. I can wean myself off of it in 4 days, usually about my normal dose. I go take it down. What is it that I do? I go from 900 to 700 to 300. So that was day 3. I 300, then I do 150, then none. And usually that doesn't mess with me too badly. It's actually the latter parts of it that are a little more difficult. I wind up having a little withdrawal, but then as soon as you wind up increasing the receptor density in the cells in the brain, it winds up being fine. It is almost 11 p.m. where I'm at. It is almost 11. I was planning on chilling here for anywhere from another 10 minutes to another hour and 10 minutes or so. I'm actually getting quite tired. But I'm going to, do my best to stay awake for you guys and answer any questions that you might have or talk about whatever comes to mind. I'll call them intellectual ruminations or whatever. But hopefully we're not talking about the same kind of ruminations that a cow does. That wouldn't necessarily be quite so intellectual, and it would have an awful lot more to do with, things that are grassy and fibrous and not necessarily easily digestible. It's very interesting. I'll ruminate on this one little bit. I started streaming some months ago. This is the 46th episode of Calling Sacred Cows, and the 70-something video that I have on YouTube as a public. As a public video. I've done some private stuff for my family and stuff beforehand, but I've noticed that the longer that I do this, and it even gets better after I sit down for a while and get in the flow of things, the longer that I do this, the more the more capable I wind up being at sitting here and talking. Especially coming from an introverted type. An introverted type has a very abrasive extroverted function of extroverted thinking. It's always been a bit of a challenge for me to sit here and just come up with content extempore and give it. But it seems that this is also a learned skill. Being able to sit here for hours in front of a camera and ruminate in a semi-logical fashion is actually learnable. I found that, communication in general... Yeah, INTJ. Yes. Yes, INTJ. It is actually learnable. It's not easy. But I've noticed that I find myself thinking a lot less about what I'm going to be saying now than I did before. I'm a lot less of a perfectionist now that I've been just sitting here and talking and learning to sit here and talk. I'm still as much of an introvert as I was a decade and a half ago. But one of the biggest things that happened in the past decade and a half is I learned how to accentuate some of the extroverted aspects of myself. In fact, I think extroverted sensing, if we're talking about the Jungian functions, if we're talking about the 8 different cognitive functions that Jung describes, for an INTJ, I think that for effective communication, you can't only stick with TE. TE pisses people off. By itself, TE pisses people off. If you can actually weave a story with SE, if you can go and take experiences that are meaningful in any kind of an indirect or direct way, and then weave that in with TE to be able to tell a story or demonstrate something about whatever it is you're talking, you're going to come across as way more palatable than somebody who just comes off like a bulldozer. I know it's not necessarily the easiest thing to do. In fact, I would say, and I don't mean this in a pity party sense at all, but I would say that for any type to actually get on and be social and do a stream, the INTJ would have the most difficult time. An INTP has NE as one of the cognitive functions, and that makes it considerably easier to go and have an exposition on something. Now, demeanor might make it difficult to get it out, but once it gets out, it's going to be there, it's going to be fluid, and it's going to be very relevant to many people. And it's also going to be really interesting and really cool, whereas what comes out of the mouth of an INTJ is going to be very logical, straightforward, methodical, and perhaps especially for people that have already heard it before, boring. But there are different functions for different kinds of people. And ultimately, you guys aren't going to be watching my stream unless you think that you're going to be getting something from it. Whatever it may be. Just the opportunity to listen to some weirdo ruminate, some insight, some fun. I don't know. Watching, I don't know if Ala's still here. Watching Ala and me banter back and forth about being illogical or having multiple personalities or whatever. And ultimately, I'll let you know that having the chat here at one point was very intimidating for me, because going over and looking at the chat would derail me from whatever it was that I was thinking about. And dealing with a single track mind, having a particular point, sometimes I still need to go and just have my monologue. But I can go and be here reading the chat and actually function. So it's possible to almost unconsciously learn these new things. And I would recommend for any of you that happen to be introverted but ultimately do need to, for some reason, involve other people in your plans, which I really hate doing, but it seems to be kind of a necessity, that if you make marginal improvements on a daily basis, you keep a record as to where you are, you will notice huge differences, even on a time scale as little as a month or 3. And definitely after a year, you will notice a huge change. But the question ultimately winds up being, what are the marginal improvements you're making, and what are your goals? And it doesn't need to necessarily even be in a social realm. It can be in some completely different realm. But the idea of consistent marginal improvement is an awful lot better than constantly making these paradigm shifts. The paradigm will eventually shift, but it will be an awful lot more manageable one little bit at a time. And yeah, I am coming here from a very dogmatic approach, saying basically, if you want to be effective, do what I say. No, you don't have to if you don't want to. I'm telling you what I've seen work. But a lot of people don't want it. A lot of people won't do it. And for a lot of people, they can go and figure out their own thing. And if you don't like what I have to say, you don't have to listen to me. You don't have to do what I say. I mean, I'm not the boss of you. With that said, I think it's really interesting to go looking back at the past decade and a half and seeing what sort of you tried to speak to your professor. Yeah, small talk is the worst. Small talk is horrible, and that's why I don't. Small talk is the worst. I hate small talk. I have discovered something, and I'll tell you after I deal with Todd's comment. I'll actually conclude the stream by telling you what I've learned to do in lieu of small talk that still helps me accomplish the same social goals that small talk apparently exists to accomplish. But I'll deal with Todd's comment first. I'll address him, and then I will go and address the thing about small talk. Speaking of overcoming introversion, says Todd, last year I tried to speak to my professor about envy against white males. She laughed and said, "What do you know? You're only 14. Okay, so that is essentially an argument from a position of authority, saying you're only 14. That's like a parent going and saying to your child, "You're too young to learn about this, I won't tell you." Or a teacher saying, or someone saying to a parent, "You don't need to teach your children about this yet, they're too young." It's very condescending and is based on an arbitrary measure. That means that there's some basic idea that you need to be X age in order to be able to comment on Y subject, and that's a load of horse manure. That's a complete load of horse manure, and I'm very sorry, Todd, that you have to deal with it. I will say, for the sake of everybody else here too, that I think that if we haven't all been there yet, we all are going to get it to be at that point. I'm guessing most of the people watching this particular stream are very intuitive in nature. Most of the people watching the stream probably prefer to intuit things and think deeply about things and go and think about cause and effect, and A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D, leads to E, leads to F, leads to G, H, I, J, K, just all the way through the alphabet multiple times, and see the big picture. And then when you wind up going and synthesizing this beautiful big picture idea of how things work, or even worse, or better, depending on how you look at it, when you just kind of look at the situation, intuit the way things are, and then have a nightmare of a time trying to communicate to somebody who doesn't see more than A leads to B, and they need to be given like 20 minutes to figure out A leads to B, even though your picture deals with Z4 all the way up to Z4. You know, something like, 106, 104. Yeah, 104 different layers of abstraction when they're stuck on layer 1. You know, it's not fun. But ultimately, dealing with those kinds of people is going to be an incredible test of character. And one thing that we all can do, and believe me, I can always do it better. I suck at it. In fact, I preach best. That which I need to learn most is suffer fools gladly. And pick your battles. I believe there's a proverb. It's a very important proverb. It goes, and do not cast your pearls before swine. And a swine in this particular historical context is actually referring to the kinds of pigs that have the tusks that can gore you. For they will trample them underfoot and then turn on you and tear you to pieces. So, going and explicitly stating the truth to somebody that there's absolutely no way they're going to value it. There is the benefit of being able to say it in front of other people and having an audience and making that person look ridiculous and you shining. That's okay. But it might not be the most fair thing to expect a pig to be able to understand the value of a pearl. And I'm very sorry, I don't want to be the one pushing this particular hard to swallow pill. But I do think that proverb bears repeating. Do not cast your pearls before swine, for they will trample them underfoot and then turn and tear you to pieces. I'll tell a story about a leftist professor farting in my face, and then I'll go and deal with Sipover's comment about small talk and how I deal with small talk. Once upon a time, there was a leftist professor who happened to teach a class with a 16-year-old college student who was about to graduate. 16-year-old college student was forced to go to this class. It was a prerequisite for graduation. It was the only one that would fit his schedule. This professor was a leftist, a feminist, and I think had a lot of very difficult baggage to deal with. She was suffering. I think she had a chronic illness of some sort. And it was obvious that in many aspects of her life she was suffering. So on one hand, this 16-year-old felt sorry for her, and on the other hand, he was just like, well, she's just full of crap. She's teaching lies. And she did teach many lies. But one of them had to do with gender roles, and she was basically saying that females should be the powerful one in the relationship, and female should be the assertive one, and male should essentially know their place. You know, it was anything but egalitarian and anything but Catholic. It was at a Catholic university. And so she was just going and trying to shove feminist propaganda as hard as she could down the throats of her students and forcing her students to take it. And finally, this kiddo, who was 4 to 6 years younger than everybody else in the room, goes and says, look, here's the situation. We're at a Catholic university, and here you are saying this stuff that's blatantly not Catholic. You know, there is this biblical view on marriage, and people twist it. People very much twist it into saying that women are beneath men. But having a proper historical contextual understanding of things would have you know that as far from the truth as possible. Indeed, the greater responsibility from the biblical perspective is on the man to give himself in every aspect. And ultimately, if you're dealing with somebody like my teacher, giving yourself in every aspect for the good of somebody who's just an ungrateful jerk. I could only imagine the position her husband was in. I mean, I'm guessing there was probably a lot of strife at home, and that couldn't have been good. But then she completely lost it. She went off the rails. She had no clue how to deal with it. She just started losing it, saying, "How could you possibly say that, you nasty chauvinist pig? You're horrible, blah 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 blah," and so on. And I said, "Well, okay, well, why don't we conduct a poll here?" My understanding of marriage is a very traditional, one might say patriarchal, biblical understanding of marriage. But I'm not going to go and expect, obviously I am going to expect my wife to let's say if we are at an impasse, then I would say, yeah, my word would take precedent. But if every single decision in my life, if I'm held to the standard that every single decision of my life is to be conducted from the point of being married onward for the good of her and for the good of the family, and thinking of myself last, and putting the needs of my family and my wife, especially my wife, first. If I go and I then say, okay, I'm pulling the patriarch card. I'm pulling the card that says you listen to me because of my role. The only time I do that in say my marriage with my wife is when she is hurting herself. If she's up at 2 in the morning and has an early morning the next morning, and she's worried about something, or she's concerned about something, or she's trying to get something done, and I know that she needs her sleep, and I know she's going to be having a really nasty day, and I know my wife well enough to know she's going to have a headache in the morning. She has a particular sleep schedule that she needs, or she will have a headache, and if she has a headache, she gets a migraine, and it's horrible. I want to save my wife from having a migraine, so I will sweep her off her feet, carry her to bed, and set her down there. You are going to sleep. Mrs. Wife, I love you too much. You are going to sleep. You're not going to worry about that. I'll take care of the dishes. I'll take care of this. Or we could wait until the morning and do this. You and I are going to sleep. But either way, you need your sleep. Or, I don't care that you aren't thirsty right now. You are in the process of dehydrating yourself. You will have 12 ounces of water at least at this particular point. I know you well enough to know that if you don't get your 12 ounces of water right now, you will get a headache in another 3 hours. Yeah, I know that this is not easy for you, and yeah, I know that you're going to feel a little bit nauseous, but drink your water anyway. I will go and put my foot down in matters like that, where all she's going to do is whine and moan and complain about doing the right thing because it's not the easy thing to do, or it's not the thing that's emotionally expedient at any given moment. It's my responsibility to be the less emotional one, or to be the one that kind of has my stuff together and go and say, no, this is the way it is. I love you too much. You're going to take care of yourself, or I'm going to take care of you, in spite of whatever emotional crisis might occur. I'm putting my foot down. You don't put your foot down in ways to be abusive or nasty or superior or condescending. You put your foot down in ways to be caring. But I wasn't married at the time that I was in this particular class, and so I didn't phrase it that way. But ultimately I did say, okay, if I'm in that kind of a situation, and I don't even remember exactly the instance that I gave, and I said, okay, well, I would expect, if I go and I'm married to somebody, if I'm married to a woman here, and I were thinking about her best and she was being stubborn, would she want me to put my foot down and say, no, this is the way it's going to be? No, you are going to take care of yourself. No, I love you too much to let you hurt yourself this way. Like, how many women do you know? How many women in this classroom would submit to that kind of authority if they knew that I was fulfilling my role as a husband appropriately? And almost every single woman in that, I said, let's do it by a show of hands. Almost every single woman in that classroom raised her hand. Almost every single woman in that classroom raised her hand. And the teacher didn't like that. I had cast my pearl before a swine, and so she walked up and down and up and down the rows between the students, and we had those desks with the chairs attached to the desk. And when she passed by my desk, turned her hips ever so slightly and farted in my face. That was the response I got for my comment. So now I'm going to talk about Zipover's thing about small talk. People like to hear people like to hear their own thoughts repeated back to them. People like to be validated. And people like to feel understood. Oh, I'll keep it short. Okay. People like to hear their own ideas. People like to be validated, and people like to don't have yourself castrated. There are plenty of good women out there. You just need to find them in the right spot. Okay. Well, then I'll be a little bit more verbose here. Or at least I'll be verbose enough to answer the question. Or verbose enough to give you maybe something to pull off of. Maybe to give you an idea. I don't know. Anyhow, I hate small talk. Small talk is evil. Small talk is the bane of social existence, and somehow people expect to do it. The reason for small talk is very simple. If there's something non-threatening, a non-threatening element of human interaction. Small talk is supposed to be it. And you basically engage in small talk, apparently, for the purpose of ascertaining, is this person that I'm with a threat? Now, you're not going to guard against every single psychopath out there, but by and large, you're going to be able to figure out whether or not I'm dealing with friend or foe, whether or not we're dealing with people that are on enough of the same wavelength to be able to carry on a constructive conversation, and so on. So, one thing that I found in terms of small talk that helps is asking questions. What brings you here today is a good one. And you start with that. Or, and then you listen carefully to the person's answer. And then they'll say something like, well, she's like a chimpanzee. Oh boy. Sort of, yeah. She's like a chimpanzee. So anyhow, you're in this conversation with this person. Oh, so what brings you here today? Well, I'm over here at the dining hall at the university hospital because I'm going to be observing surgeries for the next 4 hours, and I'm getting myself a little something to. Oh, so you're in the medical school? No, actually, I'm studying pathology, but I'm doing some sort of a volunteer work here, whatever it may be. You just go, and then you latch on to things that the person seems to be emotionally attached to. And you encourage them to talk more about them. Oh, you're studying pathology. And you use their words. What you're doing when you do this is you are generating rapport. Oh, so you like corpses. You don't actually expand. You don't expand or expound upon what it is that they say. That's the trick. You don't try to push the conversation anyway. Especially as an introvert, that is definitely not the way to go. You lead the conversation. And the way you lead the conversation is you get the other person to open up to you in such a way that they don't feel threatened. And the way they don't feel threatened is if they feel understood and validated. You don't need to agree with them in order to understand and validate them, but they need to be understood and validated. And the way that you demonstrate understanding and validation is by repeating their words back to them. Verbatim. And you don't do it in any kind of condescending way, and you don't do it in any kind of a way that has anything but the most pure intentions. Your goal in the conversation is to get to know somebody. Your goal is to connect with them. That is the goal of small talk. And you can get them to open up about their life in so many different ways when all they ever intended to do was talk about the weather. If they come up to you and say, nice weather, you say, yeah, nice weather. And if they don't say anything, oh, what were you thinking about that? Or, yeah, what brings you here today? And then when they answer the question, the floodgates open. You don't need to say a word. When they answer the question, the floodgates open and they provide you with the material for the rest of the conversation. It's just up to you to repeat verbatim the important parts back to them and get them talking more. You learn more and more and more about the other people. And then if there's something relevant that you can inject later, then you inject it. But ultimately, you listen and you demonstrate empathy. And therefore, in that particular talk, where specifically you're talking about basically what it is that's around you, what it is that brought you there, why it is you're there, etc., wherever it is that you happen to be, that demonstrates, or rather that generates for you, some baseline of rapport that you never really lose with that person. That you smile, you're friendly, and you get to know them, however simple or complex they may be. And then you connect with them at the deepest possible level that they're willing to connect. And I guarantee you it's way deeper than they might actually originally think. Because you've gone and demonstrated yourself as a friend who gets them because you're using their language. And immediately you make that connection. Then if you want to go and make a deeper conversation, then you can go into, okay, what is it that you do? What is it that matters to you? What is your job? What are your hobbies? What do you do to spend your time? What is it that makes you tick? What brings you meaning? And you start asking those kinds of questions. What is love? Well, the feeling of love. That's actually a good question, Todd. Good point. Very good point and good question. What is love but such mirroring sympathy? I would say that definitely being in love is a very powerful version of that, yes. Being friends can be that as well. Feeling infatuation can be that. Feeling attraction can be that. There are many different things about interpersonal dynamics that can be that way. And that's actually one of the integral parts to flirting, but not at all exclusive to the domain of romantic interaction. But then once you can start connecting on that level of what's actually important to you, what it is that you do, what is it that you study, what it is that matters to you, what brings you meaning, and so on, it's just a natural flow of events because you haven't given them any red flags. Because your goal in the conversation is connecting and learning more about them. The conversation is about the other person. So you don't need to bring any new material. You don't really need to worry about anything that you're going to say. And the entire conversation is contingent upon how good you are at repeating the person's lines back to him or her in an effective, empathetic manner. And if they start asking you questions, that's a big if, because most people suck at conversation. Then give them the opportunity to be the good conversationalist. Do take a turn talking if they go and prompt you. Make it easy for them. But especially if you want the role of power in the conversation, be the one asking the questions. If you want to be the leader of the conversation, be the one asking questions. If you want to be the one that's developing the rapport, be the one asking questions. If you want to be the one developing the goodwill, be the one asking questions. Oh, yeah, it's horrible. The most, Spover says, most difficult thing about talking to many people is that when you bring up interesting subjects, they have nothing interesting to say at all because they have never thought about anything. Yeah, exactly. Hateful sympathy. Hateful mirroring. Exactly. Exactly. Spover, you nailed it, and yeah, it can be very annoying. One thing you can do if you're looking to increase connectivity or you're looking to at least derive some sort of utility from this yourself is seeing if there's any way of connecting your wants and desires with the wants and desires of other people, and then coming up with strategies whereby both of you can pursue what you want. But there are lots of people that all you're ever going to do is connect at the deepest level that they can connect because you're capable of so much more depth than they are. That is just a very basic fact of life, and I'm very, very sorry to say that that doesn't make it any less exhausting or less energy intensive in that sense. But at least you're not stuck talking about the weather. You can talk to your, 85 IQ friend or acquaintance about, like, I don't even know. Good capitalism, successful business requires love and good sympathy. Yes. Yes. You will go and you will find what the needs of the other people are by so doing. Good capitalism, successful business requires love and good sympathy. Yes. In a free market, if you talk to somebody, if you just talk to somebody, find out what that person needs. If you can fulfill that need, and then find a way of getting them to fulfill your need too. Getting them to associate your need with their need, and coming up with these mutually agreeable deals, both of you will be richer. Even if it is just a basic transaction, because both of you wind up getting what you want. You nailed it. And that ultimately, right there, that is how free market capitalism works. You nailed it. And if you can't find a way of connecting these wants and desires or whatever, at least you walk away from the conversation having somebody's goodwill. So that if you run into them again, they're going to treat you as friendly. They're going to introduce you to other people as an amazing guy or an amazing gal. You're going to be winning friends and influencing people just by being present and listening to other people. Most conversations are going to amount to nothing, but constantly putting out that investment will eventually allow you to connect with the people that you need to be connecting with. And then once you go and you find the right circle of people, you will have essentially the greatest tools of social lubricant the greatest tools of social lubrication at your disposal. Simply empathizing with the other person and conveying that. So just put yourself in the right place. You don't need to talk with everybody, but if you do talk with somebody, then make it count. Make it count. It doesn't need to be small talk. It can be very big talk. And even if it feels small to you, it might feel big to somebody else. But asking about the weather is completely overrated, and it's just a generic loser way of doing small talk. What about the weather? What about the food? Who cares about the weather? Who cares about the food? Why are you here? If you're here for the food, well, then it might actually be an important topic for you. But if it's just something that you're dragging out of the crack of your butt in order to have a topic of conversation, well, that's questions. And that's another reason that I'm, like, if something ever happened to my wife, for example, I know I wouldn't have any trouble getting somebody else to be attracted to me. I mean, I might not be the best looking. I might not have the best anything. I mean, up here I'm not exactly all that shabby, but, I don't know. I'm not the most attractive dude. I'm not Brad Pitt. But I do know how to connect with people. And it's actually very easy once you wind up deciding that the other person, whoever that person is worth something. And connecting with that person, however little or much it may be, is worth something. And just acting accordingly. And having your actions being congruent with the idea that I'm going to get to know this person. It really sets you up to being in a good place. From a business sense, from a romantic sense, from a social sense, even as an introvert. It's always better to have allies than saboteurs. Automate a generic response. It saves you the frustration of someone asking you questions like, how are you? What you can do is honestly answer the question, how are you? And if they don't want to hear it, well, then that's their problem, and you realize that they probably aren't a good listener and you don't want to deal with them. Or you can say, uh, oh, fine, thank you. What brings you here? That's a really good way of turning it out. Just find a way of turning it back on them and getting them to be the one to talk. Even if you're an extrovert, get them to be the one to talk. Of course, the talking part will be more easy for you as an extrovert, but still, the listening is what generates the rapport. No monster dong. Automation is a habit, then you become what you practice. Could be dangerous. Well, asking or repeating to someone back their words could be an automatic habit. It could be automatic for you to tune into other people. It could be automatic for you to get to know people, and that I think would be okay to some extent. But then it could also be that if you're just going through a set of motions and actually not being present in the conversation, then that would be potentially worse. But what was it that who was saying? Mere neural like corpses, castration. Did I deal with everything? Oh, disregard the minutiae of the Bible. That was the next thing that I remember that Daniel asked an interesting point. What do I think of the idea that one should disregard the minutiae of the Bible? Well, what do I think of the idea that one should disregard the minutiae of any book? You read them. You certainly read it. But I think that especially when it comes to understanding a book, you need to look at it in terms of what would people have understood it to mean at the time? What do people understand it to mean now? What do scholars, what do experts understand it to mean? What do lay people understand it to mean? What do people of all different backgrounds understand it to mean? And don't jump to conclusions too quickly. I'll give you an example. As a Lutheran, we believe in the inerrancy, infallibility. And the Bible is the inerrant, infallible Word of God. So, but then you can wind up having two people reading a Bible passage and coming to different conclusions on it. Well, okay, so what does that mean? That means that you need a certain frame of reference. Or frames of reference. And so you need to think a lot about, well, what's my frame of reference? How am I reading this? What kind of language is this particular passage using? Is it symbolic? Is it real? And so you need to have an understanding based on what kind of literature it is, to whom it is addressed. Is it more concrete or more abstract? All of these different things need to go, and you can't just say, okay, disregard the minutia or don't disregard the minutia. Although I would tend to say don't disregard the minutia, period, if I were to take a stance of either disregarding or not. But then you ultimately run into issues of language and so on. So it would be an awful lot better to read things in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek than it would be to read things in, say, English or Spanish or German or what else have you. So, always try to get into the mind of the author. Understand what's actually being said. And if it's difficult to understand, well, just know that it's been difficult for everybody to understand up to this point. And, maybe there are things that can't be understood. Maybe there are things that are crap. Maybe there are things that are good. I don't know. Or I would say probably at least I think I know. But ultimately, those are things that I take as articles of faith. Many of them. So I can't really say that I know things in the sense that one can be scientifically certain of certain things. But then there's also matters of faith touch matters that science can't touch. So, yeah, read the Bible, read the Quran, read the Bhagavad Gita, read the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Read all these different things. Figure out what's going on. Don't be afraid of them. But don't go and just say that we need to go and understand one particular passage of the Bible without context. Because what a lot of idiots will do is they'll read one verse, expound it as, well, I'm a Christian, I believe the Bible is true, therefore this verse is true. This verse is perfectly true. I mean, you can go and take a verse that says there is no God and say the Bible says there is no God. Well, yeah, technically you can say that, but that's stupid. And lots of people are too slow or too ignorant or whatever to take a proper contextual reading of something. And whereas I think it's very important for people to be able to read something, I also think that, I can understand the reason that the Catholic Church had for the very longest time the idea that only the clergy should be able to read the Bible. And it had more to do with the fact, I don't think it was necessarily to lord control over the people, although that certainly was a side effect, but I think it was because people were legitimately concerned that you would wind up having a bunch of uneducated people coming and saying, well, look, it's just as simple as this, when it really isn't. Just like the people that, read a teensy bit of relativity and think that they know what they're talking about, and they just go spouting, it's all relative, heard, and call themselves a scientist. Or that listen to Michio Kaku and think that they understand physics. That is a load of crap. There's the layman's version of stuff, then there's the expert's version of stuff, and I think that unless you understand things at the level of the expert, you don't have any right to say I understand this at all. You can maybe say I have a rudimentary understanding of the matter, but then ultimately you run into Dunning-Kruger. And Dunning-Kruger plays into an awful lot of things and an awful lot of people's competencies, and who knows, maybe I'm on the very left-hand edge of the Dunning-Kruger curve and don't have any right to say anything about certain things without, a disclaimer that I could be an idiot. Of course, maybe I might understand what's going on. It's just very interesting how this all plays together and ultimately winds up introducing a situation that's much more complex than some of these incredibly simple maxims might have one believe. Exegesis of 4 levels of sacred text in the minutiae like clues. But who are we reading? The translator of the author. And don't read it in Finnish. It's probably twice as long. It's interesting. Postmodernism is becoming an excuse to get rid of experts and become one of our own fancy. Yeah. Or just dismissing the idea of experts entirely. Nobody can be an expert. I can't be an expert. You can't be an expert. Nobody can, because it's all about how we feel about it. But reading the Bible in Finnish is actually very interesting, because in certain aspects it captures things that were said in, for instance, the original Hebrew or Greek. But then if we think about, why did the Finnish language exist? What happened? What happened with the Finnish language? The Finnish language exists because Mikael Agricola invented it, or invented the written form. And he invented it for the purpose of translating the Bible. And so you wind up having a lot of theological terms that are very clearly defined or have a very clear interpretation. Then you wind up having a lot of things that are just completely missed. But Finnish has the advantage that one logical man came up with pretty much the whole basic structure of the language. And of course it evolved over time, as every language does. But it's kind of fun. On the other hand, cross-referencing things, you can of course go and find misinterpretations here and there and everywhere, and then obviously there needs to be some sort of resolution, and that necessitates some sort of context or frame of reference. Then we're back where we started anyway. The Finnish Bible is approximately the same length as the English Bible. It's approximately the same length as the Spanish, or the if you add up, for example, the Vulgate, something of that nature. They're all approximately the same and take about the same length of time to read, because you wind up dealing with conveying about the same amount of information in the same amount of time. No, unfortunately, I don't know Swedish. I'm sorry. The only ones I got to any appreciable extent are English, Finnish, and Spanish. Yes, I've read about the CTMU. How long did it take me to learn Finnish? I don't know. On one hand, I could say I still don't know Finnish. I have a lot of trouble with it. I mean, I can communicate pretty effectively in most circumstances, but I really I haven't had much of an incentive to get past the point of being like basic middle school level. I do not talk about the CTMU here. Yeah. Yeah, I read the CTMU, or rather, I read the works that Lang and Dude has come up with regarding it. Ooh, boy. That actually felt pretty good. Be able to snap my back like that. Or my back's been hurting for the past half an hour or so. Anyhow, the stream went on for about as long as I was expecting, but it seems like things are winding down. On Monday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, or Tuesday at, I'm sorry, not 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time, or 4:30 a.m. my time. I'm going a little bit later on the stream than I have been in the past on the early morning streams on my part, because I have a little more exercising to do than I have been. We'll be streaming at 9:30 Eastern Time on Monday night, 4:30 a.m. Eastern European Time on Tuesday morning. I'll answer to the one last point that you make, Todd, and I'm going to ask you what is the definition of faith, and what would the definition then be of an article of faith? Those are very important terms to define, because based upon the definition, and obviously you can't really have a conversation on faith unless you wind up having terms clearly defined. Based on those definitions, you can come up with some pretty interesting conclusions on the matter. I would actually say that faith is the most natural thing in the world. Ultimately, how do you know we can have faith in our senses? How do you know we can have faith that reality exists? How do we know? Do we know that Descartes' proof, I think, therefore I am, is actually true? Indeed, Todd. I would say that's a very good definition. But then you wind up having to think at what level. Can I believe my eyes? Can I believe my ears? Can I believe my senses? Can I believe my reason? Can I believe my emotion? What level of cognition can I believe? Yes, it does. That you exist requires faith. Unless you define existence such that you exist. But that is an axiomatic statement. You exist. I exist. Those are axiomatic statements. that are taken as an article of faith. Now, you could exist and not believe that you exist, and you could also not exist and believe that you do exist. Right? It's more complicated than that. Leave you with that thought. Just ruminate about how complicated that could possibly get. See how far down the rabbit hole you can go. That is a really, really deep and convoluted rabbit hole. And if you wind up, being able to talk epistemology, it's a very, 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 very interesting branch of philosophy. Faith and epistemology are hand in hand. Is it the only real thing, though? What's real? Having adequate answers to all these questions can be mind-blowing. And ultimately, you'll find that it all boils down to your frame of reference. It all boils down to your frame of reference, which is a very scary thing. It can be very scary to think that, a lot of what my understanding about reality boils down to the way that I look at it. It boils down to the way I understand it. It boils down to my articles of faith. How do you know that you aren't a disembodied brain in a vat? How do I know I'm not a disembodied brain in a vat? You can't. It's complicated. Very, very complicated. Anyhow, I hope that you wind up having a great deal of fun diving down that particular rabbit hole, and I'll look forward to seeing you again in another day or two, depending on your time zone. Could very well be. You see, Todd, that's an assertion. That is an assertion, not an argument. Do think about that. You're stating things with a great deal of confidence. See ya. Hope you have fun. Follow it all the way down the rabbit hole. Bye.